Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Just a quick thumbs up. Very good. Excellent. Welcome, everyone, to this virtual visit of MCC's work in Ukraine. Thank you for coming. My name is Ken Ogasawara. I have served with MCC in a number of capacities over the years. I believe my first gig was as a parking lot attendant at the New Hamburg Relief Sale, unpaid. After high school, I did the SELF program in Uganda, and now 20 years later, I serve with the communications team here at MCC in Ontario as the communications specialist. And occasionally I have the privilege of hosting webinars like these. Before we get too far into tonight's agenda here, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. This is always appropriate, but especially sort of given tonight's focus on Ukraine, which among many things is a crisis of an occupying power, of a displacement of people. I think it is important that those of us who are settlers in this land, I'm hearing a bit of, if everyone could just be sure they're muted, because I'm hearing a little bit of extracurricular background information there. Yes, so we have work to do here as settlers as well. When we talk about land, when we talk about displacement, so that's important for us settlers where we live in this place we call Canada or the U.S. So I'll start by acknowledging and honoring the original people from all the nations represented in this land that we now call Ontario, where I am. Where many of us are here in Kitchener, where I am, and where MCC's head office is located. I want to specifically name the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, today called the Six Nations and Mississauga of the Credit. We acknowledge the impact of colonialism on the land, the language, the culture, and knowledge of all Indigenous peoples. And we also want to recognize the incredible contributions that Indigenous peoples have had and have made in shaping and strengthening communities across Ontario. We are grateful for the opportunity to reaffirm our collective commitment to make both the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our lives and in our work. And here in Canada, we have the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation coming up on September 30th. And I hope you'll take the opportunity, as MCC Ontario as a whole will, to do some learning and some reflecting there. So, yeah, just a few housekeeping things. As I said, please make sure you're muted so that we're not getting any extra interference there. We want to be able to focus here. And also, if you have any questions, which I'm sure you will, feel free to type those into the chat as we go, just as you think of them, and we'll be collecting all of those, and there'll be an opportunity to go through some of those questions at the end. Now to get right to it, I want to introduce our guests this evening, Rebecca Burkholder and Blaine Durstein. We're co-directors, co-area directors for Central, Southern, and Northeast Asia, which seems to cover most of Asia. I'm not sure what part was not covered there, maybe West Asia. But in any case, you were co-area directors there for MCC. You supported MCC reps in Afghanistan, in Bangladesh, China, India, Nepal, and North and South Korea. And some of you may have been on a similar webinar a year ago, 2 years ago, who knows at this point, where Blaine and Rebecca joined us, where we connected with our reps in Nepal. And now here you're joining us in a different capacity. Blaine is now supporting MCC Ukraine staff as leadership support. And Rebecca has joined MCC US as the International Program Director. Rebecca grew up in Goshen, Indiana, and holds a law degree from Georgetown University Law Center. Blaine grew up in Harleysville, Pennsylvania, and holds a master's degree in international economics from Catholic University. Rebecca and Blaine are based and are joining us from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Welcome to both of you. Yeah, so Rebecca and Blaine, as I noted, and as I just said, you were area directors in Asia for over 5 years, and you recently returned to the US. I want to say first, thank you for taking on sort of these new important roles at such a critical time. And I imagine the learning curve has been steep over the last number of months. Could you start by just telling us a bit about, from each of you, about your new positions and what motivated you to accept these positions?
Yes. Well, thank you, Ken, and thank you to everyone that has joined tonight. We appreciate the chance to share a little bit about the Ukraine program. But anyway, as Ken had mentioned, we ended our area director position with MCC, where we lived in Chiang Mai, Asia, Thailand, and we ended in February 2022, where we oversaw 7 different country programs. We were transitioning back to our home community in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we were just taking time to rest a bit before we started to look for jobs. We needed some rest in between our area director job and looking for something new. And during that time, the conflict in Ukraine started, and knowing that MCC had a program in Ukraine, we felt obligated. We thought, why don't we offer to help out? We knew from experience that when there is a major disruption in MCC country programs, especially when it involves security of MCC staff and our partners, there are a lot of unknowns, and one has to move forward with quick decisions on what you do know, and this comes with a lot of stress and trauma to staff and leadership. And any extra hands during these times can make a big difference in staff care and in running of a program. So MCC took us up on the offer to help, and we began to work with the Ukraine program, which, of course, during this time was making a major shift in programming due to the war. We began our work at the beginning of April, initially from Jordan, because that's where the area regional office is. But then after 6 weeks in Jordan, we came back to the US and have been working from Lancaster, Pennsylvania since. And as all the other Ukraine staff we are working remotely as they are.
Yeah, and what I would add is, while I was serving as interim rep with Blaine, this position of MCC US International Program Director opened up, and I happened to receive it. And so now with the MCC Canada International Program Director, together we are overseeing the MCC programs across the world. So, and I've been in this position since July. So for the last several months, I have not been involved in the day-to-day operations of the MCC Ukraine program. I think I can say that we are both motivated to carry out this work with MCC because of the connections we have made and the collaborations we have been part of with people and persons from contexts that are very unlike the ones that we have known and the ones that we grew up with. We're inspired by MCC's peace building emphasis. We know that when we partner with communities to end hunger, to access clean water, to provide education, to ensure livelihood, we are really doing peace building work. We're breaking down the barriers that divide communities. And we're living out our faith. Our work with MCC is centered on Christ's commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. And through our MCC programs, we're living out that commandment. We believe in a world with a lot of divisions, MCC is willing to extend that hand of peace. And even in situations like Ukraine, we want to be mindful of how we can continue to incorporate peace building into our work.
Thank you both for sharing part of that journey with us. And yeah, again, thank you for taking on these sort of really critical roles at this time. So I just want to, we're here. Those of us on the call here have an interest in the context, the situation basically in Ukraine right now. Can you provide, a bit of background? I mean, it's been forefront in the news for months now. But just a bit of context there, and then more specifically, kind of give us an idea of what the situation is on the ground for our staff and partners in Ukraine.
Sure, thanks. Well, as many of you probably know, February 24th, the conflict really began with the Russian military invading Ukraine. There was a major escalation of this ongoing conflict. The ongoing conflict still happening in eastern Ukraine, even as this major attack happened. There were missile strikes in many cities throughout Ukraine, including Zaporizhia, where the MCC office is located and where our Ukraine staff lived. This led to all but one of our 6 staff, along with their families, moving from the city of Zaporizhia. Now, we currently have 7 staff on the Ukraine program. 2 are living in Poland, 1 in Latvia, and 3 in Western Ukraine, and then 1 in Zaporizhia. The one in Zaporizhia is actually planning to move to Western Ukraine this weekend, and thankfully so, because as some of you may know, in the past couple of days, the city of Zaporizhia has been under attack, and missiles are being sent there and targeted. So we're glad that she is leaving. Initially, my understanding was that many people in Ukraine did not think that it was possible that the Russian military would attack Ukraine. I mean, there is a lot of family crossover between Ukraine and Russia. There are families that would have members in both countries, some relatives in Ukraine and relatives in Russia. Some of the MCC staff have family members living in Russia right now. MCC staff, like millions of other Ukrainians, packed what they could as they made the exodus from their home in eastern Ukraine to western Ukraine and to neighboring countries. Some of the staff are needing to live with others in temporary housing arrangements. Others have made permanent yet transitional arrangements. It now has been 7 months, and the question is, where will our staff end up in the long run? Will they have an opportunity to return to Ukraine, or will they take on the life-changing experience of setting up life somewhere else?
So before this current conflict, the MCC program focused on health, education, and peace. And a lot of MCC partners work with orphans, troubled youth, and economically vulnerable families. MCC partners did some humanitarian aid with people displaced from the previous conflict with Russia in 2014. So now what we'd like to do is introduce Andre, who is our program director and currently lives in Poland. He oversees our MCC Ukraine projects and partners, and there was a pre-recorded interview done with him that we would like to show now, and he will talk a little bit about the MCC program.
My name is Andriy Chaus, and I'm working for MCC Ukraine program already 5 years. Right now, I am a program manager, and I am working remotely with our team from Poland, where right now my family located. Right now, MCC working together with 16 partners, and in collaboration with our partners, we are launching about 26 projects. Yeah, and these are mostly right now because of the full-scale war in Ukraine. These are emergency response. We have 11 projects that are addressing these emergent needs of people. MR projects, 6 we have in our program right now. Health projects 4, education 2, and peace building 2. Right now we are trying to be focused really with helping needs of people. A lot of Ukrainians, about more than 8 million of people, were forced to leave their homes. A lot of people are abroad, and a lot of people are relocated to Western Ukraine. to more safe locations. And in ER projects or emergency response projects, our partner addressing like very basic needs and very important for Ukrainians. That's sheltering, having some like housing, some conditions, because people mostly like when they were fleeing from the war and currently are fleeing because the war is still like very active, and in some locations where people are faced with like unsafe situation or direct fire of Russian army, they need to flee for their safety, for safety of their kids and loved ones. So some of our partners located and working in Western Ukraine, they are dealing with setting up some shelter places there and provide necessary food packages for partners, hygiene packages. This also psychological support, moral support. That's something that our people really needs. And also I want to thank all supporters of MCC because that's really like making an impact to a lot of Ukrainians. From the beginning of this full-scale war, about 23,000 of people were helped through MCC projects in Ukraine. What I can see that MCC really like having caring approach about their staffing, about their programming partners, very attentive to their needs, and like really using participatory tools, and trying to involve partners into discussing what is like better to do in these realities, being attentive to their responses and taking about their own security, and security of participants. I have a hope that one day this war will be finished and many Ukrainians can return home and can have like a future like a lot of people have right now.
Thank you for that video, and thank you, Andrei, for sharing that. And it's sort of knowing that he's in Poland, his makes me think that last wish for all Ukrainians is a wish also for himself and his family. So that's powerful. Andrei, he mentioned the sort of the sharp shift that MCC partners had to make from sort of the regular programming due to the outbreak of the war, and even for those who weren't directly in the conflict zone. I mean, the media reporting like incredible numbers of people who have fled Ukraine, and many internally displaced people, which has had a huge impact on MCC partners and how they go about their work. So, I mean, how is MCC currently helping to support these individuals and families?
Yeah, first I want to tell you a little bit about how many people have been displaced. So currently there's a little over 14 million Ukrainians that are displaced. And you can see, I think you're all seeing a map, and 14 million is about 32% of the total population of Ukraine. 7.2 million have left Ukraine and are refugees in another country in Europe or elsewhere in the world. 7 million have left their homes in Ukraine and gone to another area of Ukraine. That would be usually from the east to the west. And we often use the term internally displaced persons, or IDP. So you may hear us using that acronym as we talk this evening. So in this map, those blue circles show where people move from the conflict area. The conflict area is that pink area in the east. So sometimes we step back and think, what does it mean to be displaced? What does it mean to leave your house, your home so quickly with the threat of war? You leave your community, you leave your church, you probably lose your job. After you leave, would you continue to pay rent, utility bills on the home that you left? You don't know what is next, and you focus really on taking care of things at that moment in time. And that is really the experience of over 14 million Ukrainians.
Yeah, as Andrei mentioned in that video, really the full focus of our partners right now is pretty much humanitarian aid to support those displaced people. Some of our partners did humanitarian aid during the conflict in 2014 when Crimea was annexed by the Russian Federation. The responses at that time were on a much smaller scale. Our partners are supporting displaced people, or IDPs. Some have government issued certificates that show that they are officially displaced persons from another area of Ukraine. These certificates that people obtain from a government office, you need certain documents, you need to prove that you are a displaced person. It is actually believed that probably only around half of all the displaced people have these government certificates. But if you do have a certificate, you are eligible for some government assistance. Some of our partners that we work with really require the IDP certificate in order for them to be eligible for assistance. Other partners that we work with will support all people in need in a particular geographic area. And there are people who are elderly or disabled or not able to pick up and leave their homes, but they still need food assistance. There are many different ways that our partners are helping displaced persons. Many of them are distributing food baskets. A partner that I just talked to yesterday was distributing food baskets from 3 different food distribution centers in Dnipro. The IDPs would register for food baskets through an app on their phone. This app is being facilitated by Ukrainian volunteers that are living outside of Ukraine. They recognize, though, that there are older people that are not familiar with phone apps, so you can also come to a distribution center and register for food in person. But after people are registered, they get a text or are told what distribution center and what time they can pick up a food basket. The partner only does so many food baskets per day at each distribution center. And the food baskets they distribute are packaged, they have dry goods or cans of food. These dry goods are intended to be enough for one person for 1 month, enough carbohydrates, enough proteins, etc., that will last a person for 1 month. They only give 1 food basket per person per month. An example of some of the food items that they would put in this basket would be packages of buckwheat, rice, semolina, oatmeal, couscous, sugar, flour, pasta. And then they would include cans of vegetables or condensed milk, tomato paste, etc. The food baskets that this partner, Step with Hope, would be handing out did not include fruits or vegetables because they said, within a month, using it in a month, the fruit and vegetables wouldn't last that long. Along with the food items, the partner also supplies hygiene baskets, which would be soap, toothpaste, toothbrushes. And in Dnipro, this partner is buying food and hygiene products from a grocery chain that they work closely with. They're ordering the food items right from the chain and creating the food baskets by volunteers who put them together in these different distribution sites. In Dnipro, where this partner is working, they have not had major problems getting food and hygiene products, but prices really have been dramatically increased over the past 6 months of the war.
So as Andre mentioned, another way our partners are responding is by providing temporary shelter for the displaced people. When people are leaving their home community, many do not know where they will be staying. We have a partner, Nikopol, who is close to the line of conflict, who provides temporary shelter for families who have just arrived and need to find a job or an apartment while they try to figure out what is next. Churches, schools, and public buildings have been turned into temporary shelters by organizations for displaced people. These shelters are meant to be temporary as displaced people looking for more permanent places to live in the area or a place to stay as they consider moving to another location in Ukraine or beyond. MCC supports a partner called New Life with supplying funds to help run the shelter and support funds for rent, utilities, and supplying warm meals while people stay in this temporary shelter. This partner also supports staff with some psychosocial knowledge so they can support individuals and families as they go through trauma of losing everything they had and deal with what they might have seen and experienced during a conflict. MCC supports another partner, Reimer Center, that is housing families in 3 large centers in Western Ukraine. These families are being housed longer term. The partner is also delivering food, and the partner also uses MCC funds to supply each house with hygiene and cleaning supplies.
As you can see, there are many ways that the partners that MCC funds support are helping meet the needs of vulnerable people in Ukraine. The conflict has pushed our partners to grow in scale. The amount of funds that our partners are responsible for is larger than they were before the conflict. As our partners' funding grows, they are also growing as an organization. We are supporting them. We're trying to help build their capacity in financial management, procurement of goods, keeping people safe in shelters while they're there, and psychosocial support.
Thank you, Rebecca and Blaine, for that, brief overview. There's a lot packed into that. You've been talking about how partners are assisting Ukrainians, but of course, these very partners and staff are also Ukrainians themselves, suffering from this war in much of the same ways. And so, can you tell us a bit about the challenges that partners and our own staff are facing?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Ken. Yeah, I mean, there's various challenges. Our partners themselves are dependent on the stability of the geographic area where they are operating in, and that varies. One partner in Nikopol, which is in central eastern Ukraine, experiences shelling occasionally, and they struggle because it can feel unsafe for the people they're helping and their staff. And they wonder if they should move to another location farther away from the front line from the shelling. But the people they are helping could not necessarily leave, such as elderly or disabled. The partners stayed for those who could not leave, but at the same time, they're working on setting up in a safer area, such where they can continue to support the community. Another challenge is staff transition. Partners are at risk of losing staff, since some may leave if they don't feel safe. Everyone has a different level of risk and responsibility. Many of our partners are church-related and rely heavily on volunteers. And as the conflict drags on, we have to be really aware of the stamina of these church volunteers and if they're able to continue to respond as they have. Accessing goods and supplies can be challenging in some areas of Ukraine. That Blaine mentioned this. As you get closer to conflict areas, there's scarcity of goods. Some stores have closed. Inflation is also an issue, over 25% in Ukraine right now, which impacts food prices. One partner shared recently that medicines have greatly increased in price, some by at least 50%. And pensions have not taken into account inflation and increases in food and medicine. So the elderly that do get those pensions, they're doing very little for them. There's also, Ken, really a high demand for support and services. One partner recently reported to us, quote, "We notice that there are many more people who need immediate assistance, and they are not among our recipients. There are many requests from residents of neighboring villages, but we cannot help them all, since they do not meet the criteria of our selection, and there are much more of them than we have resources." So this gives you a picture of some of the challenges our partners are facing.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that update. And and so to that end, and knowing that on this side of the ocean, many people have responded to that need and to those challenges. Supporters of MCC and of Ukraine through MCC have been incredibly generous. And of course, many of these folks are on this call this evening. At the time of this recording right now, there's over 13 million Canadian dollars raised for MCC's work in Ukraine. What are some of MCC's immediate plans for these funds?
Yeah, well, first of all, Ken, we're very grateful for those funds. I think there's a slide we may want to show on that. We have allocated and spent over $4 million. Those funds have gone to our partners to support the work that we've been talking about, the provisions of temporary shelter and hot meals, education support for vulnerable children, integrating psychosocial support, and evacuation of vulnerable people. We've also shipped 5 containers to Ukraine that have had hygiene kits, relief kits, infant care kits, canned meat, and comforters. And we have an additional 7 containers planned for the fall.
And regarding our immediate plans, we are really responding to what is in front of us. As we think to the immediate future, we are really focusing on the following: trying to increase the capacity of our current partners so that they can support an increasing number of IDPs with ongoing assistance. And another issue among all organizations right now that are working in Ukraine is what is going to happen this winter, trying to prepare for this winter. I mean, winters are cold in Ukraine, and energy sources have been targeted by the Russian military. Numerous energy sources are incapacitated or working less than 100%. Apartment buildings that are heated by a local boiler house pumps heat into various apartment complexes have been targeted by Russian military, and many have been destroyed. They are also targeting other thermal energy sources as well. So we will really be working closely with our partners, trying to decide how do we support people that are refugees during this winter and really have no shelter or places to stay. Some of this help could be from repairing houses that are repairable to extra funds for wood or assist in buying other heat sources, possibly generators. Where we are planning on sending 7 containers this fall, more than normal number of comforters will be in those containers.
And another area that we'll be supporting is trauma healing. We really want to look at supporting those who've experienced trauma during this time of conflict and upheaval in Ukraine. MCC is designing a framework to provide this support for our partners, churches, and others. And over the next 2 to 3 years, and this framework includes rest and recovery for partner staff, training in trauma awareness and psychological first aid, individual counseling to partner staff engaged in providing psychosocial support and spiritual support to those they are serving, and encouraging partners to increase support by hiring more staff who can provide counseling and more fully integrated into their work. So our end goal is really to develop a high quality response for Ukraine by building the capacity of partner staff to provide trauma resources and support. And we're also going to look at exploring new partnerships. If we have resources available, we'll look at other partners that have capacity to deliver humanitarian assistance.
Right, and I love, and I know this is part of MCC Ukraine programming, like partner programming before, but I love the support, the psychosocial supports that and sort of trauma healing, trauma counseling. I think that's so important, and I'm glad to hear that will be emphasized moving forward. Now, you may have sort of touched on this already, but and this is a bit of a weird question, but what are the longer term plans? And realizing that you can only look so far into the future, but what are some of the longer term plans as MCC responds here?
Yeah, it's really hard to really sort of think about. Right now, all we can see is what's in front of us. We are answering the needs that partners are telling us at the moment. We're really taking their lead, so it may not really be clear till later what's the long-term plans. We just want to be participatory. We want to be engaged with the churches, the organizations that we work with, and really listen to them. Under normal circumstances, MCC, would stay after a humanitarian crisis and really help build communities. I mean, like after a hurricane or earthquake or flooding, MCC is usually one of the organizations that says, hey, we're going to stay here after the humanitarian aid is stopped. We'll help rebuild your community. I would say that is the hope here in Ukraine, but we have no idea. There's no understanding of what the end game here is. And so when will the crisis be over? When will the fighting stop? We just don't know what the future will hold.
And I just want to, I think if we go to the next slide. Okay, so I just want to show these two photos here. You see the photo on the left is a photo of one of our partners in Ukraine providing a hot meal in a shelter for people who are displaced because of this current conflict. And on the right, you'll see a photo from Ukraine that's probably familiar to a lot of you from over 100 years ago when MCC first began by providing warm food to people caught in conflict. And as we look at these photos, we think of MCC's long-term and sustained commitment to vulnerable communities in conflict situations. And that our commitment and hope is that we will stand with people during these challenging times. Now what we'd like to do is introduce a couple of other short video clips from our staff. Olga
and Nadia. They're both of them are program officers. So they would be people on our staff that work closely with our partners and get to hear some of the stories that our partners tell. And so they have some short stories that they would like to express in these pre-recorded videos.
Hi, everyone. My name is Olga. I was born and lived almost all of my life in Zaporizhzhia city, which is in Ukraine. And Zaporizhzhia is the place where our MCC office is located. And Zaporizhzhia is actually the place where MCC has started some 100 years ago. My husband and I stayed in Zaporizhzhia as the war started almost half a year ago. We decided that it was important for us to be here to support people. And as I continue to work with MCC as a project coordinator, it's very important for me to be a support to our partners, because when they help the people in need, especially the people who were affected by this conflict, I feel like I am a part of this big work that is being done by our partners. So really, the front line is about 40 kilometers away from Zaporizhzhia, which means that, it was quite scary in the very beginning, especially when no one knew how the whole situation will develop. But when kind of the front line stopped moving at some point, like about after a week after the conflict has started, Zaporizhzhia became a place of refuge for many people who were trying to flee the occupying territories, and organizations that MCC support, and a few of them are in Zaporizhzhia, are helping IDPs, and they became very active from the almost very beginning, trying to help people as much as they could. So we are very thankful, and the partners did send their greetings, saying big thank you for all of MCC donors, because your support really helped so many IDPs. So a story that I wanted to share with you was shared by a partner who is located in Zaporizhzhia. The partner's name is New Hope Center. The partner actually had a health project with us that was mental health. The partner was helping crisis families, helping them to become healthy in psychological and mental way. But as the war started, they decided to switch their focus a little bit, and they actually rearranged the whole center, having it as a shelter for IDPs who would be coming through Zaporizhzhia. When they would come, have good food to eat, a shelter, a place to stay, and then, would prepare all the documents that they need, maybe for moving forward to other parts of Ukraine, which is much safer than Zaporizhzhia. So the volunteer did share a story with us. His name is Yuri. He is a driver and he's a host for this shelter. So he did come to the place where all the IDPs are coming, and he met there a lady whose name is Yulia. And she, as they were driving to the shelter, to the New Hope Center, she was sharing her story with Yuri. Yulia actually left Ukraine a few months ago to go for work in Poland, just to gain some money for her family, because she has 2 children who stay in Ukraine, quite young people, a son and a daughter. And both of them were staying in Mariupol. And Mariupol is a place which is very close to the front line. And as she heard about the war, she really decided, she needs to go back to Ukraine. So while she was traveling to Ukraine, she wanted to come to Zaporizhia because that would be kind of the closest place there. She actually found out that her son died in the war because he was drafted to serve in the army and just tragically died, which of course was devastating for her. But at least she knew like her daughter is alive. But her daughter was in that already occupied, heavily bombarded place, which was very hard to leave. But she was able actually to escape that place and go to Verdansk, which is a town in the Zaporizhia region, but it is still actually also occupied. So that's also hard, very hard to actually leave any occupied place and come to safety. So that's when Yuri met Yulia. And that's what she was saying, like, I have no idea how to get my daughter here so I could take her with me to a safe place. So Yuri, of course, he told Yulia, let's pray about it. We want to pray for your daughter. And I believe that God can help to get her out of there. And actually, finally, on Saturday, early in the morning, she was able to actually leave Verdansk. So they've been praying all the way while she was driving through with some people they knew. She was driving to Zaporizhia. They've been praying the whole time, trying to track where she is on the way. And finally, after a few hours, she did arrive to Zaporizhia. And the moment, that's how Yuri described that, when he saw finally that reunion of the mother and the daughter was amazing. Of course, they were crying, and it's been so touching for him because Yuri himself has a family and 2 children. So he was so happy that the family finally is reunited, at least, those 2 family members. Very soon, they actually left Zaporizhia and left the New Hope Center. They went to another city of Ukraine and then traveled even further to the western part of Ukraine. And now they are safely in Poland. That's a happy end to this story. And the partner was very happy that they've been playing a part for this lady to stay with them, to be supported by this partner, and to have this family finally reunited.
My name is Nadia. I am an MCC staff, and I've been working with MCC for almost 3 years, and it's been an honor. Like I'm really honored and privileged and humbled to work with such a wonderful team, and also with our devoted partners in Ukraine. I'm coordinating the material resource project. I would like to share about where our partners are serving and where they are delivering humanitarian aid. I would like to share a story, and it is a story of a young mother whose name is not mentioned. She shared that in her village where she used to live, there were many families with young children. As soon as the shelling started, some volunteers helped them to quickly collect their children and to get evacuated to the central Ukraine. And she shares that as she prepared to leave, it was very hard for her to grapple with the reality and just to believe that the war has really begun. She says that her hands were shaking from fear, and she shares, what can you gather in such a panic with shaking hands? Like a pack of diapers, some baby clothes, documents, and an old backpack. That's all she was able to grab before leaving home. And when her family arrived in central Ukraine, they were given shelter in a village. And they were grateful, of course, that they were away from the horrors of the war. But they lacked all the essential items people need for normal living conditions. And this young mother says that when she put her baby to sleep, she almost cried because she could not provide her baby with normal conditions. And Uman Help Center came alongside and provided her with mattress, a pillow, and an MCC comforter. And when she got the comforter, she loved it. She says, it's wonderful. It is so colorful, and it smells of new fabric. And then she also says that when the war ends, I will take this blanket home with me. It's a luxury for a displaced person to have something of their own. And this young mother also says that her house is still intact, and although houses of her neighbors have been heavily damaged, so there is a hope for her that after the war ends, she will have a home to return to. I would like to thank every person who donated to help Ukraine, and every bit of help is very valuable for us, because it is not just thousands of people, it's individuals, people who are precious for God, those individuals whose lives were shattered. Therefore, I want to thank you from my whole heart, and on behalf of every Ukrainian who received aid and assistance through MCC. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to Olga and Nadia for sharing those beautiful stories. And it is, to me, moving to hear those small nuggets of hope and of inspiration in the midst of what must be overwhelming challenges. And so, yeah, thank you, Rebecca and Blaine, and again to the staff for sharing about this work. We're kind of nearing the finishing line here, but we've got a couple questions. I have a question. I mean, this would not be MCC's the first time that MCC staff and partners have been in conflict zones, of course, but at this scale and at this sort of direct ground warfare is sort of, and perhaps unique, I'm not sure, but what is there a protocol around how to support and how to sort of say or to suggest or to say you have to pull back now, even if folks are willing to stay in, if it's dangerous, is there anything from your side that is there any mandate from you, I suppose, to sort of dictate for staff, maybe not partners, but how far do you go and can you go to suggest to folks whether they should be moving on or whether some folks are willing to stick it out? How do you balance that?
That's a good question. Yeah, so we can't force our staff to relocate, or our partners, we can't force them, but we can provide support for them to relocate, because, well, I'll talk about staff first. I mean, staff are very valuable and we want to support them as much as we can. So when this conflict happened, staff were supported to relocate to another area. But again, that's going to vary from person to person, how they feel, their level of risk, but also their commitment to an area, their how they choose to live out during this time. So we do support them to relocate. With partners,
I mean, I think we are just really supportive of what they choose to do. And I know some of our partners were looking to us what do we do here? And so it has been a real conversation. And in the end, there were people, staff of that partner who said, we feel like we need to move on. We don't feel comfortable here. While there were others that said, we're going to stay because we know that some other people can't leave. I mean, there's people that can't leave where they are. And so they've stayed and are still there, supporting displaced people.
And Ken, I just want to add to all our staff, we are supporting them through kind of group times where they can talk about what they've been through, their fears and their concern, and individual counseling as they may need it. So I mentioned about how trauma support and resource is one thing that is part of our MCC Ukraine program, but not just for partners, but also for all our staff.
Sorry, I couldn't mute there for a second. Thank you for that thoughtful response. And I'm sure it's, I hope that you are also taking care of yourselves in terms of the stress that you must be feeling as well. And I don't know if survivor's guilt is the right thing, but you are at a distance from things. And sometimes it's hard to make decisions like that from a distance when you want to be there with folks. And so, yeah, appreciate both of your work too. From a supportive side, and I'll also reference Andre's message where he talked about how MCC has been supportive, and I can't remember what the term he used, participatory something, but it seems, yeah, I got the impression from him that he was feeling very supported, and I think that speaks to your leadership as well. So appreciate that. I'm looking at the chat here. Thanks, Ron. We got something from Ron Matthews, our former executive director. The first death of an MCC worker was Clayton Kratz, who was one of the 3 MCCers assigned to Ukraine, Imperial Russia, 100 years ago. Yeah, interesting and sobering statistic there. Darlene asks, how is the food situation in Ukraine? Access to food, planting season and harvest season. Yeah, we've read a lot about how Ukraine is really the breadbasket for a lot of that, well, globally even, and how that's, yeah, how is that being affected? What is the situation on the ground there?
Yeah, well, just in terms of our partners getting food for the food that they're distributing, I had talked about Dnipro, where there is food available, but they're in other areas that are closer to conflict areas. Food is a scarcity. It's grocery stores are not open. Our partners need to drive a distance in order to get food for food baskets. So in reference to that, food is not available everywhere, and especially in Russian-controlled areas, we're hearing that everything from, like we mentioned, water. Water is a big issue. It's not available, or clean water, food availability. There's just not a lot available behind Russian lines. The eastern part of the Ukraine is really, from what I read, the breadbasket is where a lot of the farming happens and where a lot of agriculture production happens. So it is going to be limited in the future as the fighting goes on. I mean, I've read, so I get emails about where things, missiles explosions and that sort of stuff. And I've just recently read a couple where there's mining, farmers hit mines, and their tractor gets blown up, or they get maimed in one way or another. So there's a major amount of mining, landmines going on in areas on the eastern side. So it really does put farming at a disadvantage, because you'd really have to clean fields and stuff before you start doing any agricultural work.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca and Blaine, for that. Just a quick note for folks, if I'm still hearing a little bit of, some folks might be unmuted, so just make sure you're muted there. There was one extra question. You kind of addressed it a little bit, just with reference to winter coming, and you did mention that you would foresee future MR shipments, including more comforters. Like, this person asked, is there there might be a drive for like clothing? I mean, that's something that MCC hasn't done in years, but I don't know if that's on the table as well. I mean, it's hard to know, I suppose, and you're still kind of working through this, but just thought I'd mention that question.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting question. There are partners that we're working with haven't really requested that. at this point in time, I don't know. I mean, if that were something that they were really saying, we need some more like winter jackets, winter coats, that sort of thing, I'm sure we would listen to them whether we could provide that or not. I mean, we definitely are going to try to provide as many comforters as what makes sense in terms of getting them in containers for this fall, like they will be delivered October and November this fall. So trying to get some of that comforters there. And then a lot of probably cash assistance on trying to help people to buy fuel for heating, or buy electric heaters if they're available, or there was suggestion of buying generators for shelters. There's all sorts of ideas out there that we will need to decide on in the next couple of weeks. So how we're going to help our partners with for heating.
Thanks, Blaine and Rebecca. I got one last question here, and then we'll wrap it up. And this question is about the response to refugees who have fled Ukraine and who have actually come, Poland, many have, as well as to Canada and the U.S. What's the kind of broader MCC response to refugees?
Yeah.
I'll respond to the part just in neighboring countries. When refugees go to neighboring countries, we have not been a part, MCC has not been a part of supporting that anyway. There is so much need within Ukraine that we are more than overworked. Our partners have a lot to do within Ukraine. So we haven't started to look at, like, should we look at partners outside of Ukraine that are working with refugees as well? We have not done it.
And I can say for those Ukrainians coming to Canada, it's interesting that Ukrainians are not coming into the country on a refugee visa. They actually have a special 3-year temporary visa, which I believe they can work on that too. So in Canada, what MCC is doing is really connecting people who are interested in helping Ukrainians with churches and other organizations that are supporting Ukrainians. There's really just quite a number of organizations in Canada already, Ukrainian organizations, that have set up a network that they're able to support Ukrainians coming in. So what MCC Canada is doing is connecting people with those networks. And really the same is true in the United States too, that we have a newcomer connection person that again is coordinating those who are interested in supporting Ukrainians with the churches and organizations that are already supporting them. So like some other refugee populations, Ukrainians, when they come to Canada, the United States, seem to have a lot of support, which is really good.
Thank you both for your thoughtful presentation, for joining us this evening, and also a huge thanks to Olga and Nadia and Andrei and the rest of the staff and partners working courageously, in the midst of huge challenges. We can't thank you all enough. We also want to thank all of you for joining us, all of you who have joined this call, for your generous response to this crisis and for your ongoing prayers. If you want to learn more about how MCC is responding to the conflict in Ukraine, I would encourage you, if you're in Ontario, to attend MCC's Peace Conference on November 17th, which is in St. Catharines. We'll have Andrew Gett, who's MCC's trauma support and resourcing specialist for Ukraine, and he'll be joining us in person. And we'll also be interviewing a few MCC staff on the ground there via Zoom. And you can see the page up there with the website to register. Thank you all for coming. Thank you again, Rebecca and Blaine, for sharing with us. And please convey our thanks to your staff and partners, and know that we are thinking of them, that we are supporting them, and they are not far from our thoughts and prayers.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming.